I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. My colleagues Eric Trager of the Washington Institute and Samuel Tadros of the Hudson Institute are here. Sam is the author, most recently, of Motherland Lost, the Egyptian and Coptic Quest for Modernity. We begin with talking about the lords and ladies. John McCain and Lindsey Graham traveling to Cairo in these last hours, meeting with the Muslim Brothers, the leadership, meeting with at the palace with the vice president, the prime minister, about the economy, the people of Egypt. My understanding, Sam, is that these last 2.5 years since the Arab Spring, the economy has continued to deteriorate to the point that Egypt is living hand to mouth with checks coming from the Gulf and with Europe. Can that sustain the people of Egypt, Sam?
Well, it obviously cannot be sustained for long. Egypt has obviously suffered starting from the 25th of January 2011. The economy has come to a halt, basically. There's no new foreign investment coming into the country. A lot of the already existing investment is fleeing. Tourism is down. Unemployment is high. The foreign exchange rate has worsened. And the foreign currency reserves of the Egyptian central bank have deteriorated tremendously. And so far, there has been no attempt to deal with the structural problems of the Egyptian economy. There is money coming from the Gulf, the $13 billion that are promised by Gulf states to help Egypt from its problem, and probably a bit more will come in the future. But this is only something temporarily that will allow the government to survive for a couple of months, but it will also remove any credible threat on the government to start dealing with those structural problems. So it's a blessing that can be termed a curse at the same time.
Eric, you have reported to me one of your last trips to Cairo, you traveled around Egypt, that the army maintains a state within a state, its own stores. It has its own economy. Can that army sustain the state? Can it survive while the state withers?
Well, it's very hard to say. We should remember that in 2011, I believe it was, the military actually loaned Egypt $1 billion when the reserves started slipping quite low, which was a fascinating thing because here was the military essentially being the lender of last resort to its own country. Now, I don't believe that the military can necessarily do that indefinitely. I think Sam is totally right in saying that the military is unlikely to undertake certain reforms, or certainly the current government has shown no interest in doing so. And I think that for that reason, Egypt certainly down the road could look at serious economic calamity.
The calamity, Eric, just follow up on that. El-Sisi, does he have an answer? Is he being asked to provide an answer? He kind of hands off to this appointed prime minister, appointed vice president, appointed president, and steps back as if he's not in charge. But someone has to come forward with an economic plan that makes sense.
Well, the issue is that even though some of the newly appointed members of the cabinet support economic reforms, such as the prime minister himself, Hassan al-Bolkiah, the military is unlikely to allow the government to undertake reforms that will be very unpopular, that will require some pretty painful steps on the part of the Egyptian people, foregoing subsidies on gas and food in some cases, and therefore it won't want to be the target of new protests. So even though it has this cushion from the Gulf, as Sam mentioned, and it has a government that might be willing to undertake some reforms, I just don't think the military is going to want to risk its current popularity politically.
The Sinai, I've reported it, Sam, as a rogue state, a failed state. Its own violence has a course that doesn't necessarily involve Cairo, but the Egyptian military, can it police successfully Sinai? We've had 43 deaths reported since July 5th.
The Egyptian military has been facing a very tough situation in the Sinai. The situation there, of course, is not a new phenomena. It has began even under the Mubarak regime and has continued, although obviously deteriorated a lot due to the collapse of the security forces' ability generally in the whole country since the January Revolution. Currently, we've had a spike in jihadist attacks and clashes after President Morsi's removal from office. Of Of course, the groups there are not directly part of the Muslim Brotherhood, although they do sympathize with Egypt's removed president as a fellow Islamist and are viewing this action against an Islamist president as an indication of where the military rulers want to take the country, in their view, something against Islam and against the way they are thinking. So the jihadist groups are currently having an all-open war with the Egyptian military in Sinai, and we've seen the military's ability there to be very limited. They've had a number of attacks, but you really can't fight those jihadists with F-16s. You need counter-terrorism operations, and the Egyptian military doesn't have this kind of training at the moment.
Eric, is the Sinai the weakness for al-Sisi? Is he threatened by that?
Well, he's certainly threatened by it the more it becomes a factor in the news. For the moment, though, he's really focusing his attention on the Muslim Brotherhood and basically referring to them as the terrorists to divert attention from the other challenges he faces. And I think he's going to try to do that for as long as possible.
The question, Eric, about Sinai also adds on to the fact, is the military capable of maintaining security throughout the country? How are they doing, Eric? Your measure. Are they depending on the police, the Minister of the Interior, or are they doing it with the goodwill that people extend towards them?
Well, as Sam indicated, about the military, the police are just not very professionalized. This is a historically repressive force that has not really been able to police the country in the modern sense of that word. So I think the police will be used primarily for putting down protests around Egypt, specifically protests by the Brotherhood. But I expect that you're going to have pockets of instability, much like you and I have discussed for the past year.
Sam, is there a timeline? How long does el-Sisi have before things fall apart on him?
Well, as long as he can keep a general coalition between everyone besides the Brotherhood in the country against the common enemy of the Brotherhood, he has the support of the people. The man has been idealized beyond any modern Egyptian leaders. He reminds one today of Gamal Abdel Nasser and the kind of basic connection that the grand leader had with the masses outside of any political parties or any go-betweens. So until now, he's enjoyed tremendous support. There's been huge calls for him to run for political office, for him to save the country from its misery, as people say it. So I would say he has a very good opportunity now to determine the way the field would operate in his favor in the future.
Samuel Tadros is the author of the just published Motherland Lost, the Egyptian and Coptic Quest for Modernity. Sam is at the Hudson Institute. Eric Trager is at the Washington Institute. John McCain and Lindsey Graham meeting the Muslim Brothers, pointing to much worse ahead. I'm John Batchelor.